broadcasting like this, and even back on that previous repair, if it'd been more than, say, 5 or 10 minutes or old, it probably would not have done any good, but really would not have hurt anything. But this puts a nice finishing touch on the repairs. This next batch, now so far we've seen a half cubic foot and about 0.4 cubic feet. This is going to be 2 bags, 2 gallons, 2 marks to yield a full cubic foot of Resurf 2 polymer concrete. You don't, obviously here, you don't need much primer. You just catalyze a small amount, usually a 4-inch paintbrush because it's a lot quicker. Here you see a technique that where this segment's a little bit longer, so I'll also talk about when we do bigger batches with a mortar mixer. But just wet it quickly up top, it'll run down for you. If it's a little bit concave underneath the surface there, you can flick the catalyzed resin of the primer underneath that. But you see this is rather large, and this is a good example of bad concrete. But that's what you have to repair sometimes out in the field in the real world. You see I'm priming out everything up high as the primer runs down. You avoid puddling to some degree. You let gravity work for you. Put it on there really sloppily wet. Let it run down. Come back and prime down below. Now the very bottom of this, you see the almost pinkish red part of the hole. That's just fill. That's dirt down there, so there's no need in priming that. The vertical surface there at my right foot, you don't prime that because we're going to come back later and saw that to maintain the integrity of that design joint. Here also I'll mention that if you do repairs, you can mix rather quickly up to a cubic foot at a time in a wheelbarrow with a hoe. But if you do mix with a mortar mixer, you can mix 6 bags, 6 gallons, and actually you can cut back a little bit on the resin because the mortar mixer mixes so efficiently. It'll mix 6 bags in probably 30 seconds, and it handles better, wets out better, and even performs better. Keep in mind that if you use a mortar mixer, and definitely not a concrete mixer, but a mortar mixer, leave it running between batches, invert it at the end of the project, wait till it's gelled before you shut it off, or it will not start back up the next day. Here again, you can see the Resurf resin uncatalyzed. It's pinkish purple. That's 2 gallons for those 2 bags you see off to the right. As I said before, normally this catalyzed resin would go into the wheelbarrow probably first, and you would just spread the bag of aggregate blend over it where we've got a couple leaks here, but that works too, and quite often in the field you do have leaking wheelbarrows. By mixing the first bag in the bottom and getting it mixed to the bottom, you minimize dry spots. I noticed that when I did dump this, there were a couple of dry spots that easily can be dumped. The batch can be dumped on the slab next to the pothole to be checked out and then dragged into it, which is not bad technique. Or if you see a dry spot, they should be small, you can remix them in the hole, and that's really not that bad a technique. It takes a little bit extra time, but once you look at it occasionally, you do miss them. One comment here, not to practice what I preach, but if the wheelbarrow and the hoe are extremely clean, it makes the mixer's job infinitely easier. He can mix quicker, and even makes the finisher's job a little bit easier. So if you've got a crew that can keep up with it, and they can keep the hoe scraped and the wheelbarrow scraped, you can work all day with a reasonable degree of efficiency. Here I'm putting in the second bag, of course, on top, and I had a little bit of resin left over. So again, this is 2 marks of catalyst to 2 gallons of resin to 2 bags, and that yield is a cubic foot of Resurf 2 polymer concrete. On larger jobs, a mortar mixer is an extremely valuable tool, but it can get you in trouble if you ever shut it down prematurely and you shut it down with it right side up. Make sure it runs after the project is finished, usually at least 30 minutes afterwards, and then leave it inverted, and also keep water out. It needs to be dry the next day before you work anyway. This particular pothole is well in excess of 1 cubic foot. So you'll see that you can just start on one end and fill and compact, and then you can see what it did after placement of this wheelbarrow full, this 1 cubic foot. You can leave your screed right at the leading edge of it and broadcast on top behind the screed, and you're not making a cold joint or a dry joint when you broadcast the aggregate blend on top. If we'd really had a good man on the hoe there, those dry spots would not be there, but this is a good time to show that you occasionally this is going to happen, and they mix out rather easily, and you don't really jeopardize really anything when you do this technique. We will address, and anytime you have questions, our website, it's got email addresses. We'll have our other email addresses, cell phone numbers, office numbers, fax numbers, etc. That anytime you have questions or comments on anything you've seen, including forming, which is an art in itself. We didn't go into that much here, but that will be covered and is covered somewhat in our tips. For installation, we touch on forming. We also touched on surface prep, which is a big part of it. You really chip, repeat, blow it off, observe it, sound it, and usually finish up the last little few high spots and discolored spots and crippled spots. We like to use literally small camp hatchets to chip them out, and then hopefully given the opportunity you can sandblast on top of that and really get down to sound, clean, dry concrete, which is what it talks about on the bag. But it usually takes several times over. You will not get it all the first couple times you go over. You can see here, to make sure you get the finished product down to grade, the wear resistance of Resurf 2 is many times that of concrete. So if you're above grade when you leave them, unless you can catch it in the next few minutes or within the next 15 to 30 minutes, in the cheesy stage where you can literally shave it down with a sharp end shovel or a sharp hoe. But if you leave it above grade, it will stay above grade forever. Now, by finishing off the thing to grade, pulling that feathered edge back a little bit, which, as funny as it looks, really does make a difference. And then broadcasting behind the screed with it left in place like that, you can easily do a joint across a bridge or a real large pothole and not get a lot of powder ahead of you where it might affect your bond. But that's really everything we have to show you. Check out everything we've got on our photos and our written details. If there's anything there that you see or got questions about, please feel free to call us. Thank you very much.